Well, hey, did you make RSAC this year? If you did, you're probably exhausted. You got bags full of tchotchkes. But if you did not, and even if you did, stick around. I've got two people who are going to give us some outstanding insights in terms of the vendors that were out there and some things you might not have thought about. So stick around. Hello and welcome to another episode of CISO Tradecraft, the podcast that provides you with the information, knowledge, and wisdom to be a more effective cybersecurity leader. My name is G. Mark Hardy. I'm here with my co-hosts Ross Young and Andy Ellis, and we're back from San Francisco with a whole bunch of information for you. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks again for having me here, and it's such an exciting thing to be back.
Yeah, and as always, love to see both of you. So, and I just saw you in San Francisco. It's like we were just there.
Yeah, and so anyway, one of the things we found out is that the old joke goes, you go to RSAC either for the parties or for the vendor show. Last time I presented there, I realized I was one of, 8 or 9 different tracks that I was trying to compete against. And so you sort of hope that unless you're doing a keynote, you're not going to have 1,000 people listening to you. That said, however, most of the vendors probably had thousands of people looking at them. And for those thousands of people who were sort of just overcome by the array of different companies out there, we've got somebody who's actually took the time to go ahead and go through CISO Purgatory and go visit every single booth as best as I could tell. Now, maybe that's anecdotal, maybe not. But Andy, was that your mission at RSAC this year?
That was my mission. I almost hit every booth. There's a couple caveats, which was I had a spreadsheet with every booth as registered on the RSAC website. And there were some vendors who weren't on that list. In the country pavilions, there were a couple of countries that swapped out vendors at the last minute. And I'll be honest, that hit me the first day, and I didn't have a plan, and I meant to go back and see them. So I missed probably 5 vendors. But other than that, I've got 607 vendors that I saw their booths, recorded information about them.
And that's awesome. Yeah, I had another report, and not to put you on the spot or anything, I said I went to 649 of them. And I'll bring that up a little bit later because I don't have that author on the call.
Yep.
Anyway, impressions. First of all, Ross, what are your thoughts about RSAC? Of course, you were there letting everybody know about your book. You had a couple book signings things here. So quick plug for Ross here. Yep, we've all got our cybersecurity's dirty secret, why most budgets go to waste. And if you don't have one, you should go ahead and order one. Go to CISOTradecraft.com and you can look it up. But Ross, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so as I went and walked around the RSAC showroom floor, what I saw was 2 large themes really stick out to me. The first is AI SOC. You can just think of, hey, bad actors are going to be faster with their attacks, so we have to be faster with the response. And that means taking SWORD to the next level, i.e., instead of our developers writing code, how do we actually have them writing agents that does, the triage and tier 1 SOC functions? The next thing that I really saw a huge listing of vendors talking about was agent security. Hey, our developers are now writing in agents using MCPs and all of these things. So I'd say there was probably at least 40 companies really focused on how do I secure the agent, the dev workstation, and kind of this modern AI software development framework.
Andy, what are your thoughts?
So definitely seconding Ross on the AI SOC. 22 companies were just SOC focused. Now, one thing that was fascinating was, and I don't have them right in front of me because it was a secondary analysis that I did. I need to remember to drop even those into my spreadsheet, is that if you compared the Black Hat exhibitors to the RSAC exhibitors, at Black Hat, everybody was talking about AI like people, right? Your AI SOC teammate, your AI SOC analyst, everything was about it's this human replacement. And at RSAC, smaller proportion were doing that. There were still some doing that, but far more talked about swarms of AI agents or used human language, human-led, human in the loop, human coordinated. And it was a fascinating little pivot there of recognizing, first of all, I think you alienated a lot of buyers by saying, you don't get to keep your people. But the second was recognize that AIs are not humans. And that we're better off not trying to design our organizations the way they have been if you're going to bring in agents, to solve pieces of the problem. Definitely second, also the lots of people talking about agents, agentic. Although since I was going so fast through, I didn't really separate out whether they were talking about securing the agent or using the agent to do something. And I will tell you the marketing messages were muddied and unclear. So whether Ross's number is right or wrong is entirely in the mind of the marketer who is writing it down. But it was 37% of booths said AI or agent on them. And that number is actually technically even higher, given that 10% of booths said absolutely nothing. There were no words on the booth to tell you what they did. So it's almost like 50% of the booths were AI at that point.
Yeah, it's interesting when I go through these shows, because I had spent probably 20 years working the show floor.
Mm-hmm.
And I know what it's like to go ahead and you set up and you pay a small fortune. I will not disclose the rates. First of all, I don't know what they are, but I have to imagine
$35,000.
Yeah, and that's just for maybe a 5x10 or a 10x10.
I think that was somebody mentioned that as a 10x10 price. I will point out that there are much cheaper conferences, better bang for your buck. But we can talk about that later.
Yeah, we're not going to take a shot at RSAC, but the point is
you
that
get far more people at RSAC than anywhere else.
And it's almost become one of these things where you have to be there. It's one of those things where it's a check in the box, as if to say you're in the highfalutin, high society in town, and this is one of the events that you just must be seen at.
You must. But one of the things that I noticed is more and more people who are not on the show floor. Like there were VCs that basically rented out, I think, Insight rented out, I think, the Mina Gallery in that area. Mm-hmm. And they had a little alley, and all of their companies were exhibiting there as well, or sometimes only there. They weren't bothering with the show floor.
And then you get people who do kind of guerrilla marketing, where they walk around and they say, hey, I'm from CISO Tradecraft, but I don't have a booth, but I'd love to talk to you. And there's lots of ways to do that. But one of the things that I noticed, as they say, is that you set up a booth and you get all your little tchotchkes and things ready to go. And then when the door is open, in come the trick-or-treaters.
Exactly.
And
it's Halloween.
They're just sweeping everything off there. And you could scan every last badge. And chances are that 90% of those people can't even afford to buy a cup of coffee on the company's nickel, let alone the product or service. And yet it's considered to be an obligation to be there. And so one of the things that I had mentioned, sort of as my little shameless plug for CISO Tradecraft, is that, well, hey, our listeners have checkbooks. For everybody who's listening or watching the show, you're selected as people who are decision makers. We don't talk about how to go ahead and hack hardware. We don't talk about how to go ahead and get down there at layer one. We're focused on people's careers and bringing them up to the next level. So in a way, what we've built here as a community on CISO Tradecraft is the cybersecurity leaders of today and tomorrow, and being able to bring to them content that's going to help them with their careers.
Yep. So I've got a chapter for this, for the dichotomy at RSA, since I also wrote a book for your listeners, 1% Leadership. And chapter
Should I go grab mine off the shelf?
You've got one. I know Ross has got one. I didn't tell you I was going to be doing this, so Ross doesn't have it like in arm's reach.
I'm an Audible guy. I always like to have it where I can listen to it.
We can listen to it. But chapter 45 is, if you don't pay attention, you'll miss the gorilla in the room. And the anecdote that I use in this chapter is actually about vacations, which is every executive talks about how important time away is from the company, but line individual contributors don't experience that feeling, right? They feel like they cannot take vacations because their manager is always on them about deadlines, etc. And there's this disconnect because the executive is not paying attention. And so the gorilla in the room, there's a reference to the invisible gorilla. For those of you who are familiar with it, if not, go Google it. It's fun. Is that the managers basically are subverting the will of the executive simply because the messages that they're hearing are conflicted and they're picking priorities. Every CMO I talk to, and I talk to a lot of them, that's one of my client bases, says badge scans are not the reason we're at RSAC or any other exhibit. We're not trying to get maximal badge scans. But that is not the experience of anybody who's ever walked a show floor. Like, I had one company where I had somebody aggressively try to non-consensually scan my badge. Like, as I'm walking by, they glanced down, read my name tag, and said, "Hey, Andy." As I turned and looked, they held out a stack of stickers at me, and that broke my line of sight to where their badge scanner was, and they reached underneath to try to scan my badge. And they reacted badly when I shouted, said no, and stepped back. Like, this was like, just freaked me out when it happened. So I overreacted slightly, but then they overreacted. They're like, "What are you doing? What are you saying I can't scan your badge?"
Yeah. Well, it's amazing what a Sharpie can do to a QR
QR
code.
code. Yeah, no. I'm thinking what somebody should do next year is they should print out random QR codes of like RSAC staff and just put them on CISO's badges. Like, here you go. You will scan it to somebody else.
Next time I go, I may put one, and just when you scan it, you get a Rickroll.
Yeah. Well, I think the QR codes are UUIDs, so you can't just put like random content in there. It has to be an ID in the in the database for the exhibitors. Like that's the standard. Anyway, not to give you all bad ideas, but there's this disconnect, which is I don't think companies know why they exhibit and what they're trying to do. They don't sit down and say, here is our objective. Here is what we're trying to do to meet that objective. Here's our anti-objective. Right? There were booths in which their entire point was trick-or-treating. You comment about people walking out with bags. After the opening night, I'm walking back to my hotel room, and I'm like one of the last people off the show floor, so I start passing people. There were a pair of people who made me feel very, very young, who were walking out, one of whom literally had a walker, and in both hands did in fact have a bag stuffed full of swag. Now, it is quite possible these were buyers. Just to be very clear, like I'm not making fun of it. Was just this visual of the walker with two bags. And I'm like, what's going on that like people are here just to get swag?
I think the big thing here is we measure on activity instead of measure on outcomes. Yes. Yep. And so let me give you the example here. If the sales development representative is based on how many contacts they got, that's an activity-based metric. It's the wrong metric. I would much prefer to have a QR code on our banner that says, hey, if you're interested in seeing a demo where we can do more in depth, please schedule, and we link to our Calendly or whatever calendar we use. That I think is much more effective because now I have volunteers who went on the QR code, scanned it, and then scheduled an appointment. There are going to be less numbers, but I think they're going to be more effective because then you can measure your conversion rates from those.
Well, let me challenge that a little bit. I like your idea. It's very sound because you're measuring the wrong thing. But are we then collecting the wrong people? That is to say, if you're a decision maker, are you actually walking the floor? Maybe not.
So you don't necessarily need the decision maker at the show floor. So let's figure out what our objectives should be. Right. So one of your objectives is just making sure that people who influence buying decisions know who you are and what you do. Right. 90% of why you're on a show floor is that alone, which is why, to me, like the fact that 10% of the booths, I don't even know vaguely what you do. It's not even bad marketing. It's no marketing. So why did you spend the money to draw people in? That's a huge issue. So yeah, you want that. You want to have this ability for somebody to quickly see what you are, for somebody to come in and get deep depth and say, oh, show me more about what you do because I'm curious about it. And then you would like, if there's somebody for whom follow-up would be relevant, to be able to like quickly qualify them is to, who do I want to pass you to? Do I want to pass you to my low-end SDR for a call? Or do I want to get you, my best SE because you're actually a CISO?
And that's interesting because one of the things I used to do is go through and try to do the marketing review. So I go up to a booth. This usually works well for the 10 by 10s, the little ones.
Yep.
And you look at the display and you say, okay, you do privilege access management. You have break glass to protect things in terms of, and they go like, yes, right. Can we scan your badge? I just want to see, could I understand reading what you said up there instead of, innovative, powered by AI, the future generation of cybersecurity. It's like, seriously.
So, in fact, that's my experience because I would have a handful of vendors did engage with me. Most of them never even noticed what I was doing, which I thought was impressive. But it's usually the 10 by 10s or 10 by 20s that would notice. And they would say, hey, what are you doing? I'd explain, I'd look at what the badges, what the booths say, I write a report about this and I do assessments for my clients. And the smart ones would say, well, would you give me just a quick verbal assessment? And I'm like, sure, I'll tell you what I think about your booth in 5 minutes or less. But then at the end of it, almost every one of them said, well, can we scan your badge? I'm like, literally, I have a media badge is what I'm wearing, a content contributor badge. And I'm like, I am not the person you want to scan. My name, like reach out to me on LinkedIn and just connect. But don't put me into your marketing database. Like we know exactly where that's going. It's going into a multi-touch recording system So that if at some point somebody buys from my organization, marketing gets to claim that that was a lead attributed to them. That's actually the reason for the badge scans, is you should think of it like a dog pissing on every fire hydrant and tree while they're wandering around, is that when a deal closes, marketing wants to be able to say, we were part of closing that. The most forward-thinking CMO I've ever talked to, which is Ronan Shettlebaum over at SciCode. Because when I sat on his board, which is why I have this anecdote, and I hope he's not going to hate me for outing this, but I think he loves it, which is he once came in and they were showing all the metrics and what had closed, and he said, look, of all of our deals that closed this quarter, 25% of them were basically cold calls inbound, that a customer called us and said, we're interested, and we closed the deal. He said, my metric is that the more I can get in that category, that's marketing winning, because that means we reached out, we convinced them we exist, we convinced them they should talk to us without ever having to talk to them. Once we start talking to a person, that's not a marketing activity, that's sales hiding inside marketing. I now call that cultivation. It's a sort of a separate blend. But he said marketing is convincing people to buy without ever talking to them.
That's an interesting approach because, of course, the purpose of marketing, as I remember from my business school class, we were asking, professors saying, "Oh, what's the purpose of marketing?" Da, 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 da. And the answer was a single word: differentiation. What you want to do is show that you are not the same as everybody else in your category, and therefore you have something unique. Thoughts about that?
I think that's in a red ocean consumer product space. That makes a lot of sense. But if you're not in a red ocean consumer product space, I disagree. Marketing is convincing people to believe the things they need to believe such that they are a buyer.
So what we're doing then is just establishing... Sorry, Ross, go ahead.
Yeah, what I would say is I like this idea of how do we pull customers in versus pushing our content out and trying to make them buy with only sales campaigns. And I think the answer is the following. If you were to go on LinkedIn Sales Navigator and filter on, hey, how many CISOs are there in the US who are at companies with 1,000 headcount or greater, I think you're going to find there's about 10,000 CISOs in that category. That means it's actually quite easy to go on Dripify or do an email blast and reach all of them, say, would you like to buy my product? And if you just do it cold outbound reach like that, I would say you're probably in the high 99% who are just going to say no. And then you really have no follow-up conversation because you're just annoying. So I think the answer here is to say, how do I become an educator where I say, here's how to build the next gen PAM program. Here's, the metrics that PAM people should be using. And now if there's that PAM manager who's like, oh, I love learning from him. He's teaching me new things about building my PAM program. Let me talk to him. That inbound is much more desirable and actually puts you in a position of power where you're able to, coach, mentor, give suggestions. And then they're like, you're so good. I actually want to buy your product. And that's very different than, hey, would you please take a call from me? Like, it is a total different power dynamic. And I think that's why we have to use those approaches.
It's very good insight. I remember years ago when I used to do technical work as a sales, we do what we call the four-legged sales call, right, where you would get the sales guy would go out there and he'd play golf with the client and just lose by one stroke, but I got to stay behind, roll up my sleeves with the technical people and spend hours working with the product and things like that. And when the client came back feeling very proud about winning golf, and they'd ask their technical folks, what do you think about this? And she'd say, well, it works really well. And then you'd hopefully move toward a sale because you had two approaches. One is that the decision maker is rarely going to do all the validation themselves. They don't have the time, don't have the bandwidth, and quite honestly, at the CISO level, may not have that technical expertise anymore, which is okay. But it's important to be able to understand who can influence a decision maker. And that's where your target is from a marketing perspective. As Ross had pointed out correctly, you could blast every CISO in the country or in the nation or in the world, and you're just not going to get very far. But if you can influence the people who are then going to influence the decision makers, I think you have a much better path to success. A little bit longer one, but it's going to have much higher odds. Well,
and that's the marketing path. Or the challenge is we jump into sales before marketing is done in so many deals, right? And even the conversation you just had, right? There's relationship selling is a big piece of marketing. But, first, the person just has to believe that they have a location with a problem that's urgent. Like, they're not even going to talk to you if you're in a location they don't think matters. Right. That's, why we talked about SaaS native for a while. Now everything's going to be AI native instead. So all that work sort of went away. But you weren't going to buy a SaaS security product if you didn't think SaaS mattered. You don't even get to differentiation. But then, as you just pointed out, you actually have to be the buyer. You have to think your peers want you to solve this problem and that your stakeholders do too. And I would often run into this, which is I would have somebody on my team would often get a pitch from some tool that had both a free version and a for pay version. Obviously, the for pay version was better, but they would sort of send the vendor to me to be like, hey, we should buy this. And my first question was, well, are you using the free version? And if they said no, I'm like, well, you're the stakeholder and you're clearly not invested in solving this problem. So why would I throw money if you're not already willing to throw your energy? Because you're going to have to throw energy after I throw money. So if you throw it before, that's a good signal to me.
That's a good point. It's almost like paying it forward in a way, understanding that, yeah, you're not going to get every single deal, but nobody bats 1,000. That's one of the things I point out to people when they lose deals, and they said, don't take it personally. Nobody bats 1,000.
Right.
But
well, in fact,
keep showing up.
Here's the important thing. You can bat 1,000 if you recognize that there are two positive outcomes. Either they buy from you or they know what you do and have a favorable impression of you. And the problem we have in much of the SDR model of, dripify and just spam everybody is we're only measuring one outcome, which is how many leads did you get that were valid, qualified first appointment or whatnot. And imagine if look, I could close one deal a month by spamming all 10,000 CISOs in America. But every time I spam all 10,000, 100 of them are likely to put me and my company on the list of companies they will never, ever do business with again. But I close a deal a month. Is that a trade-off you're willing to make? Because after 8 years of this, you will never, ever close another deal because you have burned every CISO there is. And yeah, you might get 8 years of one customer a month, but now your business is gone.
Which is now the important thing about alignment of incentives.
Mm-hmm.
And so we look at ways that we incentivize people. And if you're in sales, the ultimate incentive reward is based on checks to clear the bank.
Exactly.
You could have a number of leads, number of calls, number of badge scans, number of demos, number of free trials, number of even contracts. But if they don't write a check, so what? And so the Machiavellian approach is going to be focus on that number at the end. And therefore, unless you're very, very careful in terms of how you build your incentives, someone may, in fact, just do what you had said. Hey, they'll go ahead and boil the ocean. They'll burn every potential prospect. But within 8 years, they've already moved on to the next opportunity with somebody else. And in fact, they'll move on to a competitor knowing that they scorched the earth for the other company. And then they have a free run to go ahead and start all over again.
So quite possibly, but recognize that there's different people through the pipeline, right? Good sales reps who are getting the checks, the commission checks, they don't do scorched earth tactics. In fact, the best enterprise sales reps are basically resellers. They have a book of 40 people who will buy from them. And they go from company to company. When they have sold to their 40 people, everything for this company, they're just moving to the next one. They're not trying to go burn bridges. They just know how to sell. The challenge is you have SDRs who are motivated on how many calls can you make, like activity measures, like Ross says, either on them or of activity they can pass to the next person. Well, I got you a qualified appointment. They're not measured on ultimate outcomes, and they're not measured on harm created as they do their step. And that's the fundamental problem, is these steps are not actually valid. Like, I have talked to people in the VC community, you run into a lot of VC partners that they're entirely activity motivated. Like, how many intros can we make to our companies? And I've had founders, well, I'll go sit down with the founder and I'll be like, what does a good intro look like for you? And how many good intros a month do you want? And their number is not aligned with their VC's number. The VC is like, we're going to make 50 intros a month. And the founder is like, I want like 3 to 5 good intros while I'm at this stage. Or like, I'm going down at heads down mode. We're developing. I don't really want intros unless you know this is an amazing person I need to talk to.
Well, let's go over to Ross for a moment, because Ross, you had been CISO in residence at Team8, and you're dealing with startup companies that are trying to get exposure, to have come up with some ideas that were good enough to get around to funding, at least, and I'd be ideally walking these companies more toward a Series A ultimately if he can get to that point. And also point out that Mr. Tim Brown has filled your shoes, very capable shoes, I would mention that you had left open in doing so. So what is your perspective when dealing with smaller companies or startups to the importance of creating those initial leads?
So I think there's a couple things here. The first I would say is whenever you have a first conversation with the CISO or a qualified buyer, I always focus on three questions. What problem do you solve? Why is this an urgent problem to solve in the next 3 to 6 months? And what differentiates our product compared to everybody else in the same magic quadrant or Forrester wave, if you will? And so this is really what CISOs are thinking about. If I come in and you say, hey, you're an AI SOC, and I just met 25 other AI SOCs, that's a very red ocean. There's a lot of competition here, and I can't really understand why you're better unless you tell me how you're differentiated. And if it sounds like the same differentiation I just heard from the other 10 vendors on this row I just walked, you're not really differentiated, and I will forget you. However, if you get those three things right, the best outcome I think you will get at a showroom floor event is a conversation for a follow-on call. That should be your only thing. Hey, I want to just hook you enough, just a little bit. Here's our screenshot. Look at this cool thing you probably can't do without our technology. Oh, that's cool. I'd like to maybe pass you over to my tech team. Cool. How do we schedule a demo? That's it. That's the only thing I think they should really, really focus on. And two, getting feedback. Remember, one of the things that you can do is not just collect customers, but actually get product insight of, hey, if we build these 3 new features, which one might be most interesting to you? Or out of the 5 features I just demoed today in this 1-minute observation, what's most interesting to you? That type of thing, when you have 1,000 people walking by your booth, such a powerful way to improve your product roadmap of where you're going to go based on direct customer insights. So those would be things I would really have some of the early stage founders really looking at.
Yeah, and that makes sense if you take a look at crossing the chasm and you have the innovators, the people who are going to be kind of to the left of the gap, at which point you still have the flexibility to define what your product or service is going to be. And well, let's face it, early on, you think you have an idea, but by querying the market, by doing the discovery, you start to realize that, hey, I had a good idea, but the market needs something similar, but not exactly that, and you tune it. Once an organization is well established, once you're off and running and you're stamping these things out by the thousands, knowing what the world really wants is not necessarily going to change the direction. Think of BlackBerry, for example, when Apple came out and they said, oh, we got a totally flat phone. Like, where's the trackball, right? Where's the beef? No trackball, no keyboard, no future. And that's the way that BlackBerry leadership probably looked at it until they realized that, well, it was the future. So one of the things you have to also be careful of is that the customer is often, but not always, right. And if you get enough overwhelming evidence that suggests that this is what they're looking for rather than what you think, unless you're Steve Jobs, you got a 1 in a billion chance of that to be the person who can honestly say people don't know what they want until I tell them what they want. Otherwise, it's arrogance. But he could get away with it. So let's not try to be arrogant at what we're doing, but listen to what the input is.
I think the important thing, I love using Steve Jobs as an example. I wrote an essay on this, God, almost 20 years ago now, maybe slightly less, in which I talk about the designed user, right? And the challenge that most companies have is they don't know who they're designing for. Apple knew who it was designing for. It was designing for Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs built the phone that Steve Jobs wanted to use. He did not build a phone for you. He built it for himself. It happens to be that a lot of people wanted that. BlackBerry was not building a phone they didn't know who they were building for. They were trying to build a computer that would fit in a pocket and would give you email in your pocket. They hadn't really designed for, like, what does this person really want? They designed for the market, around the market that existed. And a lot of security solutions do that. They look at the market. I look at the entire, AppSec space, from, code to cloud, whatever you want to call it, deploying software. It's the largest space we have in terms of number of vendors, 98 exhibitors, I think, at RSA in that space alone. And the fundamental problem that all of them have is they're building around existing broken organizational dynamics. It does not matter if you can automate patch remediation if the person you're selling to is not authorized to deploy patches, whether it's automated or not. And that's a big challenge they have.
Yeah, at the end of the day, if you have a stupid process and you automated it, you just made stupid faster, right? It's really not a desirable outcome. Instead of saying, how do we optimize the process first before we digitize and automate it, right?
Yep.
And that's
or are we even selling in the right place? Like, I was excited to see that GitHub was on the show floor. I will say, I was excited you were there because you're the right place to solve the problem. Your booth, I had no idea what you were doing at RSAC. Totally different issue. Like, I knew who they were, but I'm looking at the booth and I don't know what they're actually selling. Like, but that's where we're going to solve the problem. Your deployment platform needs to solve the software vulnerability issues, not some third-party thing that gets tacked on top of it.
So, Andy, let me ask you a question. You pointed out that applications was the largest category at 98 vendors, of which you said 87 of them are traditional AppSec and 11 are AI safety tools. So it brings up an interesting...
I remembered the number off the top of my head correctly.
Yeah, you scored correctly. We don't have to go back and edit this out, and we'll like put a little mouth that talks a different number. But here's an interesting question. Are any of those vendors in danger of being taken over by an AI? Could somebody vibe code at least 50% of what they're offering? And then if so, with a little bit of effort, get to 80 or 90%. Do these companies have a limited future, or do they have to, are they going to be like the BlackBerries of the world? Or are they going to be able to pivot and incorporate AI and sprint ahead of anybody who's going to try to go ahead and copy their design? Your thoughts on that? And also to Ross.
Yeah, most of them already are using AI, and they're already vibe coding inside their own environment. So the answer of, can I just build this in a weekend? Yes, you actually can. There's an essay, and I have not been able to find it in a long time, that somebody wrote a long time ago that said, you can code Google in a weekend. The idea that you can vibe code one of these platforms faster than just like you could just go code it is not that viable of a solution. The challenge is it's all the details that you have to get right that are what really distinguish vendors from each other. Like, I could vibe code Google, be done by the end of the week, but do I have the scale? Do I have the consistency, the coherency? Like, that's where the real problems lie, is in being, very consistent, people understanding what you're doing. So I'm less worried about most of these. Somebody actually wrote a, could I vibe code that, analysis of all the vendors. I thought it was entertaining. I thought it was a little bit too snarky. But in a sense, yes, you can vibe code almost any vendor on the show floor. But will you vibe code a product that people want to buy? That's the real question.
I think the real question is, will companies build things internally and then not make the external expense? So just imagine I'm paying $300,000 for a SaaS tool or an SCA tool. There's a really easy way to start vibe coding a lot of these capabilities that were very difficult to build 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. But now I think with a good solid week of work, you can start to build those in a vibe coded manner that actually works. Now, what's going to happen? At the end of the day, you probably have a solution that's, let's call it 90% of the way there of a commercial platform. It doesn't meet everything, maybe doesn't have all the language coverage that a better tool would have, but it's good enough. The thing you're going to have to say is, do I want to build this tool internally, knowing that I have to now dedicate hours to support the maintenance of that software that I vibe coded for perpetuity? In some cases, it may make a lot of sense. I'm a big company, I have a big team, and these are things that I just want to offer. Other times it might be HR software. I have no expertise. I don't have, these people who can really build this out. I don't want to do it. I just want to buy the tool and make it go away. So when you have the experts vibe coding, I think you can do amazing things. When you have novices trying to play as experts vibe coding, I think you get to very dangerous outcomes with your expectations you built something great.
I think there's a great example on that one, which is we saw the blog post from Notion like a month and a half ago that they built their own threat hunting platform on top of Notion. They basically, some AI, some manual things. It's in one of my favorite spaces, which I call death, detection, engineering, and threat hunting, because I think it's two sides of the same coin. And I think there's a place where we see a lot of AI companies, which are a bunch of threat hunters went and said, oh, look, I can use AI to do this, be the expert. And now we have seen that one of their rivals is the not invented here, somebody who just builds it themselves.
I think the other big question we're going to see is if you charge $300K, $2 million for your products historically, do your prices actually go down because you need to keep your existing customers when they rebid on their 3-year licenses?
Yep.
If they look at that and be like, man, $300K, I can hire someone full-time to do this for $200K, and I guarantee you can build that in a year, right? I have no doubts that he can build that in a year. That means I might just build that back in-house. So where you had $300K, maybe you're actually going to sell it for $100K next year because you know the barrier to rebuild it internally is just too high.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's going to really hurt you if you are trying to get another funding round, or perhaps if you're a publicly traded company. We saw on February 24th with the Anthropic announcement of what they were doing is that all of a sudden a lot of cybersecurity companies took a dump in their public valuation, whether or not they were guilty or sort of guilt by association. Oh, you're in cybersecurity, AI does cybersecurity, therefore you no longer have a business model. Obviously not true, and if you knew what you were doing, there's a good buying opportunity there for somebody who had those insights.
And I think here is where people are making the wrong assumptions. They're assuming Claude Code is going to take over every piece of cybersecurity. I think that's wrong. I think the thing that's happening is if I'm a company, do I build those tools with Claude Code internally? So that switch, I think, is where maybe that public notification that went out on LinkedIn that Claude Code is going to have agents that do cloud security, threat intel, network security, endpoint security. I don't think Claude is doing any of that. I think they're giving the capabilities that developers can build that very easily for themselves, though.
Mm-hmm. Well, good point. And it's interesting because if we take a special case, though, rather than looking at all these commercial products which are out there, which are going to be supported by contracts and support agreements, and there's people who can be held legally accountable for whether or not their products work correctly or not. What about open source? Is open source vulnerable to AI recoding, even though we have the copyleft and other types of ways of protecting it? If someone were to go ahead and just set up a clean room and say, let me describe what it is that I want this thing to do, and then you recreate your own code in Python or Rust or whatever, and now it's your own, and you don't have to rely upon some person you've never met with whom you do not have a contract, who might just give up on the project tomorrow
and let somebody else take it over.
Or you take it over yourself inside and you say, it's just my code. Any thoughts about whether that's a potential soft underbelly of our code base out there in cybersecurity?
So I think it is, and I think it will be very dangerous if companies head down that route. Because I think that what will happen is they don't know how to qualify that what got written is what they wanted. What I was really pleased by, and I'm really hoping to see more of, is people using AI to go and bug fix open source. And we're starting to see a little bit more of it. Although I think we've now seen some open source teams are complaining about the volume. And at first it was just bad volume. Now it's moderately tolerable volume in terms of the quality, but it's still too high of a level. And so I think open source gives us some huge, huge benefits that we should embrace. But one thing I would recommend to any company that uses open source and makes money off of it, consider donating even just small amounts of money. You don't have to make a ton, but sponsor an open source project or one of the platform groups like the Linux Foundation. Let's make sure that there will be open source software in the future.
And that's a very good point, because you get a lot of people with great ideas. Their goals are noble. There are also those who will go ahead and, as you'd said, will do the right thing, although it's harder to get that past your finance department when they say, well, do we have to pay for it? No, well, then don't. As compared to, well, if we don't, it won't be here tomorrow, at which point it's a matter of, do you go ahead and take some of your corn and plant it for next season, or you just try to eat it this season, realizing, well, next you're all going to starve to death next winter?
Yeah, I'll tell you, one of the ways we got it passed when I was at Akamai was we literally hired a developer to work on OpenSSL, who's part of the OpenSSL dev team. So it's not like we hired a random person. And when finance was giving us a hard time, and everyone in the business like, can we afford this? We just said, look, it means that all of our change requests for OpenSSL go to the top of the queue. That's what we're buying, is the person who's going to be prioritizing things works for us and knows our environment. That just naturally gives us an advantage. It's not one where like we're going to put in bad things, but when we care about specific performance issues, they'll get taken more seriously. And so think about that certainly as you get to being a large enough business. If you're in the, making 500 million or more at security or at any software, and you're not paying for some open source developers, I think you need to reconsider the benefits that you both get from open source and what you can get.
And maybe I'll take this on a different angle. Hey, if you are unemployed today or trying to get, better job positions, how do you start giving back and join like the OWASP platform out there? So, there's a lot of OWASP AI top 10 things that are happening. If you start contributing to those types of open source initiatives, well, guess what? Now you get a lot of recognition. Now you're influencing the standard. And then does that help you also land those next gen jobs that you actually want?
And you've got some good insights. So I will admit, I did something very similar back when I started my career, is that I had joined some of the ANSI standards committees back in banking, X9. X99 and X9F and X9, X42.
We always knew you were a little bit of a masochist, but man,
a long time ago. But the whole idea was when I went there, and they were either bankers or there were vendors, and then there was GMARC. And I was in my 20s, and I'm a hired gun. I figured, okay, fine, I'm a cybersecurity. We didn't even call it cybersecurity back then. But I was a consultant. I wanted to make myself knowledgeable about the stuff. And I got my name on a couple standards. The idea being is if you're marketing to somebody and they say, well, can I help you implement this particular standard? I said, well, what do you know about X9.42? It's like, well, open the cover and read the third name on the list. Is that would be a way to help sell your services. So along the lines of what Ross is saying is pretty good. So as we're getting close to the end of the show here, what are your thoughts about wrapping up and recommendations for going forward? Are you going to be at RSAC next year?
That's the plan. I'll be at RSAC next year. I'm planning on doing this at CyberSecCon, what was formerly HUSecCon. I'll do that in September. I'll do it at Black Hat probably this summer. I need to see if I can get a media badge from them. I'm actually speaking at ATL SecCon later this week. So I was told I'm supposed to pronounce that Atlantic SecCon, but if they wanted it pronounced, they should spell it. And so maybe I'll get time to go over to the show floor and do one for them as well. I think that would be entertaining.
Ross?
Yeah, I'll definitely be at RSAC next year. I think it's a good place to just go and network. I mean, it's one of the few times when you're going to have 1,000 CISOs in a place. That type of audience invites a lot of opportunities. Surround yourself with smart people. Surround yourself with attractive VCs. Surround yourself with, these, let's call it industry influencers, and things can happen really, really well for your companies, for your business networks, for your personal ambitions. I think that's always a smart thing to do. As far as other conferences, we're going to be at Black Hat. GMARC and I, we're also going to be at this other CISO event called the CISO Retreat. So that's something we're going to talk more about. It's a private event for CISOs. So I think that's the other shift that I'm seeing. More and more CISOs are going to some of these VC events and private smaller groups. Not everybody wants to be feeling like a herd of cattle of 300,000, people all just marching through these showroom floors. Sometimes you want to just be around 100 people. So find those opportunities too.
Yeah, and I, of course, will plan to be there at the RSAC and Black Hat. I'll be at my 31st DEF CON in a row. So you talk about getting long in the tooth and things such as that, although not necessarily. But kind of as a tangential thing, at the end of May, there's a conference called SaltCon. You talk about spelling. How about NACL?
I love theirs. Theirs is hysterical.
I thought that was pretty great. So I'm speaking there, and it's going to be basically a bunch of people who've been around a long time. And so their speakers are not going to be talking about new innovation, but some of us will be just kind of reminiscing about what things were like back in the old days. And so that's another thing that's out there. But I think it's very important, as Ross had pointed out, is to look for the concentration areas of the people with whom you will align with, whether you're there just for networking. If you're too overt about there trying to sell to everybody you meet, it's not going to go well. But if you could exchange LinkedIn contacts and go ahead and build a relationship and start to getting to know people, you'll gain a lot better insight of what's going on out there. And I think those contacts will help you out.
I agree.
So With that, let's wrap up. Thank you very much for being part of CISO Tradecraft. For our listeners and our watchers, if you're not already following us, please do so. Follow us on LinkedIn. You get a lot more than just a podcast. You get some steady news information, as well as a Substack newsletter if you'd like to subscribe to that. Let everybody else know where you're getting your knowledge for your cybersecurity career. So give us a thumbs up or something that will help improve our standings. We don't get paid extra for that, but it does help other people find CISO Tradecraft. So Andy Ellis, Ross Young, thank you very much for being part of our show. And until next time, stay safe out there.